Welcome to today's RUC People. I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. David Harrison, long-time associate member of this church and known to many of you, I'm sure. So welcome, David. Thanks for making time today.
Thanks, Russ, and thank you to you and Aristide for such a labor of love. 40 interviews, you were saying, so that's amazing.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry it took so long to get to you, but looking forward to today. So David, tell us a bit about what you're up to these days. I know you're a very busy man. I think we're probably seeing a little bit less of you these days, and I'm not putting all that down to moral decline. I think there's other things occupying you. So tell us a bit about what's keeping you busy at the moment.
Yeah, so I'm, as you know, I'm the CEO of the D.G. Murray Trust. It's a foundation that really focuses on developing South Africa's potential and largely through early childhood development, focus on young people, and also trying to address some of the intractable problems we have in our country that are either attitudinal but sort of steeped in the history of the past. For example, the rates of heavy drinking in South Africa. So we have a lot of our work is both focused on human development, but also trying to address sort of the deeper societal changes. So I oversee a lot of that work. I also have been leading a lot of the vaccine development work in support of the Department of Health. And I haven't managed to shake off all of that yet. So I'm still responsible for the National Contact Center, the COVID Contact Center, which we try to expand its functions. We're expanding mobile health services for young people across the country. We still run part of the communications campaign and the procurement and distribution of cold chain and IT equipment to 2,400 clinics across the country. So yes, at the moment I do have two lives, sort of a nightlife, which is the Department of Health work, and then the D.G. Murray Trust work. But I suspect there's moral decline as well.
I doubt, David. So the D.G. Murray role, you've been in that, I think, 12 years, something like that, am I right?
That's right.
And I know, previously you had a background, in health, but also public health. But the D.G. Murray experience, I know from my own experience of that, you've really shifted the way it operates and, very strategic, but also, rather than being just a passive giver out of grants to get involved with lots of partnerships and, match funding. I think that seems to me it would have been a pretty exciting journey for you and the organisation. Do you want to sort of give us some of the highlights of that, of reflecting on those 12 years?
Yeah, sure. I came to the D.G. Murray Trust really out of my prior experience, and we can talk a little bit more about that just now. But with a strong sense that we have to create hope. We have to create a sense of real and imminent possibility in the lives of people, of South Africans, because if we don't do that, there simply isn't the impetus for change. There isn't the desire, the motivation to transform our society. So for me, that's really been the underlying theme, the philosophy that's driven the work that I've tried to do. And if that's what we want to do, we have to start young. We have to start right at the beginning, and we have to continue to get behind children and young people as they grow up. So that's sort of the journey that I've tried to take DGMT along. But also, I think the first thing I did when I joined DGMT was show my board just how insignificant DGMT was. when you looked at the amount of money we spend relative to the amount of money that's spent by other funders or by government in South Africa, which meant that we had to look at ourselves differently. To think that we had pride of place because we had money actually was an illusion. We had to change the way we had operated. Our identity had to move from being a philanthropist to being an innovator, to being a node of change in South Africa. And that meant that giving away money was only a little part of what we did. We had to be communicating into the public space. We had to be connecting people in different ways, creating unlikely coalitions. And that sort of activist stance in the policy space, and asserting the role of civil society, I think has been where a lot of my effort has been directed.
So, David, I mean, I know you've come from a health background, and I think one of the things I always admired about you is you're very practical, hands-on. You're the guy coming to the rescue when something goes wrong, in small things, but also this huge visionary drive and passion to make a change in the big picture. I'd be interested just to track that a bit, where that started for you, do you think? This passion for justice, but being an agent of change, and I think that goes back to all your career, and we'll talk through some of that in a moment, but interested in where that came from, you think?
Well, it certainly came from my experience of growing up and my family and my parents. Very interestingly, I mean, my parents were sort of fairly conservative, I would say, sort of fundamentalist Christians. That was their experience growing up, and in a way that was their salvation. That was literally what gave them the space to think differently and radically, because their fundamentalism was, if Christ said, if a person needs bread and you give them a stone, or if somebody needs something, you give it to them, then you have to do that. That's radical Christianity. And so that was my experience growing up. They became community activists. My father was the first white person allowed into black education at the time in KwaZulu-Natal. Started teaching under a tree, no school at all. My mother, a community activist who said, why are these children without food? How can we have marasmus and malnutrition? We have to do something about it. And so that sort of practical application became an instinct. It became rooted in all of us to say, all of your efforts, all of your talk, all of your actions only have meaning if it truly changes people's lives in a very, very practical way. And so that's what I've tried to hold is I'm hugely enamored by big ideas. I love them. But being able to root it in real change in people's lives ultimately is, I think, the measure by which I want to be judged.
But I mean, I think there's a lot of people who are very good at seeing the person in front of them and how can I help them and change their situation. And I know you trained to be a medical doctor, and you obviously have skills and training to be able to do that. But it's not everyone who can both do that, but then somehow translate that to a bigger picture. And I know you went to California and I think studied public health at Berkeley, and but to even get there, you must have had that kind of bigger vision in your head somewhere, that you didn't want to just change the person in front of you. You wanted to, have much more grand ambitions than that in terms of bringing about change.
Yes. And again, my parents were a great combination, because my mom was very much deal with the issue in front of you, deal with the problem. My father was sort of hugely committed to social justice and started to give a sense of the system that had to change. And certainly my teaching history, teaching mathematics in his school, because he didn't have those teachers, made me realize, but wait a minute, it's not just these students, but what about the next cohort and the next cohort, and how do we change the system? And so even as I went to medical school, I knew that I wanted to do public health. I wanted to change systems. I wanted to be involved in anything that had a greater influence than simply the individual, as much as I loved clinical medicine. So yes, I was really fortunate. I left medical school at a time when there was still conscription for whites, for white males, and so I had to dodge the military. I didn't want to go to the military, and so I registered for another degree. The military still wanted me to come and join them. I wasn't interested in doing that, and so I was very fortunately invited to set up the Health Systems Trust, and that was a really interesting joint venture between the African National Congress, this is pre-94, and the government of the day to say, look, we've got to start planning for health services. We've got to start thinking systemically. And I think that nobody with any political cred would have touched the leadership of the Health Systems Trust with a barge pole, and I think that that's why it was given to me, you know.
So this was in KZN, David?
This was in KZN, but it was it was sort of the national trust that did a lot of the planning for health services. So we were planning for the integration of 17 different health departments. We were, for the first time, putting together all of the health finances. We didn't even know how much money was spent on health in South Africa. We didn't know how many nurses and doctors there were. So all of that planning happened to be needed to be done. And I really was just incredibly fortunate to be put in that position.
And how did that come about? How did they know who David Harrison was? I mean, and how old were you? And had you just finished your medical degree?
Yes, so I did my internship at Groote Hospital.
Here in Cape Town?
Here in Cape Town. Yeah. I had been an opstoker, a troublemaker. Cheryl Carolus used to say, "Klipgoeie." So a stone thrower. I led the desegregation campaign when there was a transition from the old Groote Hospital to the new Groote Hospital. So I was sort of a student activist, but really focused on trying to ensure that there wasn't class and race discrimination in the transition. So I was sort of a bit known at that time. And then I was very, very fortunate in that I just pitched up in the office of Professor Marianne Jacobs from the Child Health Unit and said, you know, I want to do child health policy. And she became my mentor. She became somebody who took me under her wing and created the space for me to start working in the health policy field, writing publications on health policy in South Africa. So I was sort of a little bit known, but I was still the outsider. I was still certainly a rank outsider for a position like that. And and I won't mention it, but certainly the person who was my competitor for that position, who's now deceased, one of our former ministers of health, wasn't deemed to be the right person. And I'm really, really fortunate that I just happened to be in that space and was appointed into that position.
So just back a couple of steps, David. You grew up in KZN, yes. In Durban.
In Port Shepstone, which is down southern KwaZulu-Natal. Right. My parents ran, as I say, a non-government organization in a rural part of KwaZulu-Natal there. Right. And my father started the first high school and then the first TVET college in that community.
Wow. And how many kids in the family, and where were you in the pecking order?
It's a good question. I say that because our family sort of shrunk and grew. There was sort of the biological family, but there were also foster children, and then there was just the rest of the community. So that was the nature of our house. So there were 5 biological children, and I am number 2. I'm actually one of twins, so one of the older.
Okay. And why medicine? You know, at school, were you a good student? Did you have a sense, I want to be a doctor? Or, you know, of all the things you could have done, why that?
I guess you're right. It probably is. It was a bit that being a good student at school gave you opportunities to go into medicine, to go into, shall we say, some of these higher status professions as it was viewed at the time. Yeah. But I also, as I say, I think I had sort of a strong sense of, even at that stage, the nutrition work that we'd been involved in. The circle of our circle of friends, the medical superintendent of Murchison Hospital, who is another mentor to me, let me come in and assist with surgery as I was growing up. Those were sort of the formative times that I think, other than being an actor, I think medicine was the only other alternative I really considered.
And that's a long haul, studying medicine, isn't
it?
Was it 6 years? And was it I think it's UKZN now, it's probably then the University of Natal or something?
So I couldn't study at UKZN because at that stage, UKZN medical school was only for black students.
Right.
So that's why I came to Cape Town.
Oh, right. So you studied here in Cape Town? I
studied at Cape Town, yeah.
Where, at UCT?
At UCT, yes.
Right, okay. And that might have been where you first got involved with this place.
Yeah, very interesting. I needed to pay for my studies and also was a little bit uncomfortable simply being a student when I'd been in a sort of fairly activist space before. So I became a child and youth care worker at a children's home while I was studying medicine. And one weekend, because I was on duty, I couldn't go anywhere, and so I switched on the radio and listened to the minister giving the radio sermon, and it happened to be Douglas Bax.
Right.
And Douglas was outrageous. He condemned government, and he particularly condemned the conscription of white males, and I was feeling it. I was clear that I wasn't going to go to the military. So I said, this is my man. So the next weekend when I was off duty, I came here. And let me say, coming into a strange place, slightly reserved into the congregation, I wasn't sure whether I wanted to join, but the congregation was so warm and inviting. But it was Fiona McLennan and Doreen Scott who actually sealed the deal for me, because they came and visited me by that stage, I'd moved out of the children's home, but they came and visited just to really entrench and invite me to be part of the congregation. And that for me, just as I say, it was just sort of a sense that I belonged here, and have been here sort of ever since, except for the time when we were outside of Cape Town.
Yeah, sure. So we'll come back to RUC a little bit later, but you studied UCT, got your medical degree, then back to KZN, and then it was Health Systems Trust.
That's right. And then I ran the Health Systems Trust for 5 years, and it was an incredibly exciting time. It was the Mandela, it was the Madiba years. So a lot of the preparation that we'd done for 2 to 3 years, planning for free healthcare for women and children, planning for the public school nutrition, the primary school nutrition programs, the restructuring of the health services, all of a sudden that just dropped into place on the 27th of April, 1994. And then we had like 6 weeks to put the free healthcare in place, to amalgamate this entire health system. So it was a frenetic but incredibly energetic and exciting time. And we were all doing it. The Minister of Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma was on our board. She became the minister. I knew her well. We were literally doing this stuff together. So that was a wonderful. It was a wonderful 5 years. But even towards the end of that, I realized that we had good policy and we put in place good stuff, but there was still no Panado on the clinic shelf in Mount Freya. or in Bizana, or in Lenyenye. And so I realized that that's the sort of the process of planning and policy is not enough. We now had to turn the whole system on its head and start from the clinic and say, how do we get the Panado into the clinic itself? What is the systems that need to be in place? So I stepped down from heading Health Systems Trust. I still stayed in HST, but I started another initiative, a bottom-up initiative called the Initiative for Sub-District Support. And the whole idea was to say at a sub-district level, let's get the systems in place that deliver high-quality healthcare. And that really was the precursor to the district health system in South Africa. Yeah, so I did that. I did that until 1998, and then I sort of really felt like I dived in at the deep end. I was just invited to make things happen. But I just had, I had my medical degree behind me, but I didn't have anything else. I'd done a master's, sort of part-time master's in the mix, just to keep going. But I felt like I needed to find out how you really do things well. And I had this idea that I had to go and be in a more organized and more structured academic environment. And I was really fortunate that I had a mentor who said to me, David, don't go do public health. You know public health. You've done it for the last 8 years. You've done it in a way that's far more fundamental than if you learned it at the university. Do something else. And so I did public policy, and I did coursework on gravel mining and education and law, everything but health. And that for me was a wonderful experience. It just sort of opened my mind, and I said, I can see how I can apply these ideas into the work that I'm doing. But it just sort of expanded my scope and I guess my horizons for where my career could have gone.
So this was in California?
It was California.
And which institution?
So I was at Berkeley, University of California, Berkeley. Yeah. And it was Claudine and myself and Andrea, who was 3 months old.
So I wanted to get to Claudine and the kids. We'll stick with the career a bit, and then I'll come back to the family journey as well. So how long were you in California?
It was a 2-year master's.
2 years master's. And when you came back, what happened then?
Well, it was really interesting. When we left, HIV was starting to emerge, but it wasn't really in your face. Yeah. I think I was in 5th year, 1988, when I first saw the first person living with AIDS admitted to hospital, 1988. One of the publications that I started, that still continues today, is called the South African Health Review, and it's an annual review of health and healthcare in South Africa. And we started it in 1995, that was the first issue. And HIV was chapter 17. Now look, we were obviously concerned about systems reform. We were worrying about how to integrate, how to bring these pieces together. But that's how far on the back burner HIV was in our minds at that stage. We wanted to get the system right, then we'll deal with the rest. Yeah. So when I left, HIV was in my mind, but it certainly wasn't top of mind. When we came back, it was in the midst of the mortality phase of the epidemic. It was just within 2 years, people were starting to die in huge numbers in South Africa. And just before I came back, I'd been invited to come back and really get off the ground a new initiative for HIV prevention for young people called Love Life. Yes. And I didn't conceptualize it, but it hadn't really been established. It was going to be launched at the July 2000 HIV conference in Durban, which is where it was launched. And that was really my first day at work at Love Life.
Right. and then started another exciting journey and growth of a very large national organization engaging lots of young people. You mentioned right at the start, young people need to be part of the change, and I know that was very much at the heart of Love Life. Tell us a bit about the Love Life adventure.
Sure.
We could go on a long time, I know.
Adventures and real real sadnesses in many ways, just starting in 2000 and so 6 years before antiretrovirals were provided. So the people that we were working with, many friends, colleagues, dying of AIDS before antiretrovirals came through, and so yes, I mean that was the first real hardship was trying to run a national HIV prevention program where the president said there wasn't HIV, or certainly it didn't cause AIDS, and certainly no public money was to be spent on HIV in South Africa. So it was a very difficult time. It's sort of a political resistance on the one hand, and also, of course, starting at a time when people didn't want to talk about sex. Still don't want to, but we forget how little people wanted to talk about sex 22 years ago.
Yes.
And so some of our engagement on SABC for the first time, using words that had never ever been used on those sort of platforms before.
Yeah.
So resistance from government, resistance from the general public. Why are you talking about sex? Our kids are going to go out and have sex, and resistance from the public health community as well. Yeah. Very interestingly. Public health community that I think was, and even today, has a very superficial understanding of how you bring about behavior change. Yes. Young people are having sex, they must abstain, they must be faithful, they must condomize. Tell them to do that, and they will go ahead and ABC, abstain, be faithful, condomize. It was almost as simple as that. The notion of just stopping and say, wait a minute, let's understand why young people are putting themselves at risk, even though they know that this could have life-changing consequences, and understanding that dynamic, and really then try to put young people at the center, not HIV, not even high-risk sexual behavior, but young people at the center, and say, how do we build a sense of purpose and belonging and identity and a sense of real possibility for young people so that they are motivated to protect themselves? That was the message of Love Life and the way in which we engaged with young people, which meant that we had to use young people to talk to other young people. I changed because I want to be like you, Russell. Yeah. not because you or I hear a message. It's that sense of camaraderie. It's that sense of resonance. And so we built Love Life up through this network of thousands, ultimately tens of thousands of groundbreakers, and below the groundbreakers, Mpinches, 50,000 Mpinches, a network of young people across the country who are engaging at its peak with over 1 million young people every single year, face to face, in addition to all of the controversial billboards and the publicity that Love Life got. So I ran Love Life on adrenaline, I guess, for 10 years. It was a roller coaster. Then came in the Bush administration and their narrow focus on abstinence only, which that's sort of ideological underpinning that affected international funding for HIV in South Africa and distorted where money went to in South Africa, took it away from comprehensive programs and put it in far more ideologically driven and narrow programs. So that was the experience of 10 years, which sort of got me to a point where I realized that either I had to be in it for the next 10 years, or I needed to start transitioning out, handing over to the leadership that we developed, and focus, as I say, more on what I realized was at the root of many of these problems, whether it was HIV or crime or heavy drinking, and that is just a sense of hopelessness, a sense of a lack of real and imminent possibility in life. And that's why I wanted to focus on youth leadership, and that's why I wanted to transition into the DG Murray Trust.
Which takes us back to my first question and the current, your current role, yes. Or one of your current roles.
Yes.
So, David, let's talk about the personal side of life, not just your career and your passion there. Tell us about Claudine, being a dad, amongst all of that activity, hugely demanding, exciting work. I've always admired you as a father. Selena goes to stay with you sometimes, and she tells David's up at 6 a.m. cooking breakfast for all these girls, and thinking this guy is superhuman. How have you managed to, combine fatherhood, being a husband with everything else, and just tell us a little bit about.
Yeah, Russell, not very well, not very well. I have a lot of regrets about the Bush administration coming and taking away 40% of our money in 2005, and my having to spend every single weekend that year fighting, traveling across the world, trying to rescue the money. In the first year of Tessa's birth, I missed her infancy. I missed that year. So maybe the early breakfasts are out of a sense of guilt. It's something that I really love doing, getting up, making them something every morning, trying to make spaces to connect around a very, very busy schedule. We have a wonderful family. It's a very connected, very honest, very open family, and in a way, I think a lot of that stems from the stability of Claudine and just being at home and always being there for the children and able to hold that space. And sometimes in a very gentle way, just put her foot down and say, David, family first, And it's amazing. We've never had a fight in our entire married life. But I think it's largely because I know when to back off. It comes to the point where I hear Claudine, even in her silence, even when she's making it clear that while I have these great visions and I just love doing that stuff, equally I love family and I must make the time for them. But it's never a balance. It's always a tussle. It's always a trade-off that I live with.
Yeah, and paradoxically, has the sort of the COVID experience helped in that you're probably getting on less planes and running the world from your command station in Somerset West?
If I were to agree with you, Russell, it would be the first fight that Claudine and I ever had in our married life. No, it's been incredibly tough. The first year was really pivoting a lot of the DG Murray Trust work and saying, what is nobody else doing that we need to be doing? So PPE for community workers because everybody's focused on health workers and radio communication because everyone's focused on social media and mobile data because everybody's focused on everybody's focused on Wi-Fi. So a lot of that first year was just really frenetically trying to respond. And then the second and third year, as I say, I've been sort of seconded into the National Department of Health. So it's been an incredibly busy 3 years that I'm trying to step back from. It has been wonderful having had the family home for a lot of that period before Andrea went to Norway and Alyssa went to Rhodes. But again, I think that same sort of constant tussle, same sense of how do you spend a Saturday afternoon with the family or on the computer remains with me.
No, sure. And David, the faith journey you talked about, your parents being, quite conservative fundamentalists, I think Baptist, am I correct?
Yes.
What's that been for you? You had this early encounter with RUC, and I think you were here during very, very heady times, in South Africa changing, and a very vibrant youth group. I know in other interviews we've heard from Don and, Sue Ellen Shea were part of it, and Fiona and Howard, and, Steve DeGruchy, who's no longer with us.
Yes.
You went away, came back to RUC, and, have been a very, active presence in this church, I think, for a long time, more recently, less so perhaps with other commitments. But, can you reflect on to what extent faith has been a driver in your life, and why still the connection with this church?
Yeah, and again, just to sort of reflect on my parents' own journey, I think watching them change from being sort of fairly narrow, conservative, fundamentalist to their application with the world, and realizing just how pragmatic and how real and how honest you have to be in your engagement with the world. That sometimes means that you have to let go of beliefs or ideologies or your way of looking at how the world should be, as opposed to dealing with the way the world really is. For me, I think watching them change, watching them adopt a far more pragmatic Christianity that's so rooted in their lives, I think has also laid the basis for the way that I have viewed Christianity. I don't want to be called a Christian because I don't like labels. It worries me to be labeled as an anything, because then it means that there must be others who are not, and I don't think that that's a particularly helpful way of looking at the world. I also think that if that definition is in terms of your belief, then how do you change that belief when a new set of information comes your way? And so I like the idea of being part of a fellowship of explorers, of people that are disciples of Christ, so the actions of Christ, the commitment to love and to solidarity. I hugely identify with that, and the sort of the interface with the mystery of spirituality that we don't quite know what it means, but which is beyond the realm of knowing, for me is also intriguing. I'm interested in a God that I can't see and I don't know, because that's a space that we must be striving towards, that we must be, rather than a God that is all known in my life. And so, yeah, I wouldn't say that I wouldn't say that I can profess to have a personal relationship with a God that I know. I rather like the idea of constantly striving to be part of a fellowship that is seeking to grow together, that is seeking to grow our society towards a better place, that is seeking to be in sync with nature, that is developing sort of productive synergies with our environment, in the belief that all of that is just part of a smaller ecosystem of something grander than ourselves. How we interpret that, I think is something very personal, and I guess I prefer the mystic rather than the notion of trying to reconcile science with faith.
Lastly, I just wanted to talk about what does fun look like for David. I think at different points we've seen your thespian attributes in action, and that's been very entertaining. You also talked about being in sync with nature. I think you're famous for some rather hair-raising encounters with nature in all its wildness. And I know you love hiking, and the family have joined you on that on many occasions. Can you give us a sense of what fun looks like for you? I know at the moment probably there's not a lot of time for it outside of 2 jobs, but yeah.
Yeah, we're going walking on the Tsitsikamma Trail for 6 days in January. Yes, I mean, fun is the look on Russell's face when I tell him that we're going to 3-star accommodation, and after hiking the entire day, pitching up at this derelict shack, which is our overnight accommodation, and just see him put his head in his hands in absolute shock and horror. I mean, I don't exaggerate. That's how it was, but it's my place to let my hair down, to be at one with nature, to enjoy friendship with other people is very much, I guess, in that neutral space, that space where none of us are in control. You may know, and in fact, I was at this church when I and my brother and sister and 2 others were lost in the Drakensberg for 6 days in one of the biggest search and rescue efforts ever. And for me, that was life-changing. It was just this. I mean, we came so close to dying. We ended up jumping down the Drakensberg escarpment. But that sort of extreme engagement with nature just really puts you in your place. It just, I mean, just realize how small and insignificant you are, but also just how important solidarity and communion is. There were thousands of people praying for us. There were 40 people who came to this church every morning at 6 o'clock to pray for our rescue. I think it was Suellen who always used to love telling me that there were 40 people who used to come praying for our rescue. When they found us, only 20 people pitched up for the Thanksgiving.
I remember hearing another apocryphal encounter with a rather deep puddle in the Okavango Delta as well.
Yes. It wasn't apocryphal. I'm not very good. I don't have a very good reverse gear. This car didn't either. But yes, it is true. I have to confirm that I drove a car with my entire family into a crocodile-infested river with crocodiles and hippos in the Okavango swamp, and got stuck right in the middle as the car sunk to the bottom. And we had to get rescued off the top of the car after 2 hours or so. So yes, I'd say 95% rational, 5% truly not.
Sure. Oh, well. So David, just finally, what's on the horizon for you? The next 5 years, more of the same? Do you have a sense of anything new, anything particularly changing, as you look forward?
So certainly in terms of my mission, which is sort of the collective mission of DG Murray Trust, I think that we're at a point in South Africa where, looking back over 25 years, there are just so many regrets. We're not as bad as we were 25 years ago. And anybody who says that didn't see the children with marasmus and kwashiorkor that we were dealing with on a day-to-day basis. But we're nowhere near where we could have been 25 years down the line. And so I'm struck by the fact that, while I don't have a reverse gear, while I really like to make things happen fast, in fact, a lot of the change in South Africa, getting out of the inequality trap, is intergenerational. It requires these 20, 30-year agendas to bring about change. It requires an entire new generation of children to grow up whose lives are fundamentally different to that of their parents. And so a lot of our work has been focused on, particularly on early childhood development, on nutrition, on early learning, on parenting. And we have to sustain that. We have to keep building that momentum. And I believe that that's probably going to be the greatest contribution that I think I could continue to make over the next 8 years is not to dream differently, but actually just to put head down and focus on the gains that have been made, in the belief that Madiba's children, we failed, but we don't have to fail the children born today or tomorrow or the next day. If we can truly put in place the type of programs and systems that could fundamentally change South Africa.
Thank you, David. It's been fascinating as always, and I want to thank you for your contribution to this church. I can say you've been an inspiration to me, and I know to many others. So thank you for your time today.
Thanks so much, Russell.